All right, welcome back. Taiwo Oyedele, the Fiscal Policy Partner and Africa Tax Leader at PwC, is joining me right now. Mr. Oyedele, welcome to the program.
Thank you and good morning.
Where should we start from? Nigeria's debt servicing cost. Nigeria debt servicing cost exceeding revenue. That was the alarm that was raised by the finance minister just a few days ago. I would want you to break it down for our viewers and for those listening. What does this really mean?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I think the presentation by the Honorable Minister for Finance, Budget and National Planning, and then the revelation that we have spent more than the revenue we earned in the first 4 months of the year, January to April, in just servicing debt. Put it simply, the interest we paid on the money we have borrowed before exceeded the income that we generated in the same period by about 19%. So the debt service cost to revenue ratio for the federal government for the first 4 months of the year was 119%. So what this means is all the money that the federal government generated was not enough to pay the interest on the money we have borrowed, and therefore we have to also borrow to pay back the interest on the money we borrowed. And of course, what that also means is all other expenditure of government, including paying salaries of civil servants, other overhead, military, defense, MDAs, as well as even infrastructure, all the spending, all the other spendings, we must have also borrowed. So this is maybe not surprising to many people because we have been watching the trend and it's been getting close to 100% for a while. But the first time now it exceeded 100%. Now, what that means is that if we don't reverse the trend, either by generating more revenue or reducing our costs drastically, it means that we're going to get to a point, that the economists would call a debt trap, where you have no choice but to keep borrowing to service your debt. And at that point, your cost of borrowing will keep going up because people that are lending you money will start worrying whether you can pay back. But because you're a sovereign nation, you may get to the point where you have to start printing naira just to pay back your debt. And at that point, inflation will go over the roof. We've seen this play out in a number of countries. The one that comes to mind easily is Zimbabwe, where we say, God forbid, at some point their currency was entirely worthless because they just kept on printing naira. Overall, Nigeria's debt, like they would say, as at the end of March this year, was about 41 trillion naira. If you add the money we borrowed from the CBN, ways and means, which is getting close to about 18, 19 trillion now, that comes to about 60 trillion naira. If you divide it by the number of people in Nigeria, average of 200 million, that's about 300,000 naira per person, that we have to pay back. I have to say that this is not the most concerning thing. 300,000 naira, if you divide by exchange rates, whether you use official rate or parallel rates, it's less than $1,000 that we each have to pay back, compared to America, where their sovereign debt is close to $30 trillion for 330 million Americans. That's close to $90,000 they have to pay back. But interestingly, even America, who has the highest amount of debt worldwide, is barely paying 2-3% of their revenue in servicing the debt. So our situation, we cannot just compare with the rest of the world on the basis that our debt to GDP is low. We now need to focus squarely on our debt service cost to revenue ratio.
Mr. Oyedele, we've been talking about this for a while now, in fact, for years now, perhaps even since this administration came on board, that it's not about debt to GDP ratio, it's about debt servicing to GDP, or debt servicing, in fact, to revenue, which now the chicken has come home to roost. The question now is, which is on the lips of many people, is Nigeria broke? Are we, let me just put it that way, is Nigeria broke? Because what it means now is that all the revenue we are earning is used to service debts, not even paying the principal. So the second question, the first question is Nigeria broke. The second question now is, we are using the revenue we are earning to service debt. What happens to the principal?
Yeah, good question. I think just to put it as it is, the answer to your first question is yes, Nigeria is broke, right? Nigeria is broke. We don't have money to meet our obligations as they fall due. The only difference between Nigeria as a country and, say, a company or an individual, if Nigeria were to be a company or an individual, it would have been declared bankrupt, right? But because it's a country, you can print the currency. You don't need permission from anyone. So that's the only reason why a country will not technically become bankrupt, but they will have all the consequences of bankruptcy when they end up in a situation like this for a long time. You are right. Also, we have been saying this. In fact, to my mind before this interview is, what else are we going to say that we haven't said before? We
Yeah.
seem to know all the problems. We seem to know what the solutions should be, but then we're not taking practical steps in trying to implement those solutions. So if, to your second question, if all the money you get, just imagine someone earning a salary of 100,000 naira. And because you had borrowed so much in the past, the interest you are paying is more than the 100,000 naira that you earn as a salary. So you have to also even borrow from some friends and family and maybe a bank to even just pay the interest. Now, the original amount you borrowed is still there. You have not paid it back. So the principal amount is still there. If you break down Nigeria's debt, it has different components. You have the component with multilateral and bilateral institutions, the likes of the World Bank and maybe the other, countries around the world. And then you have the one that is domestic, which is mostly Naira, treasury bills, government bond. And then you have the Euro bond. So this is government borrowing from, private sector, but borrowing it in dollars. Of course, you also have, borrowings from the like of AFDB. By the time you put all of this together and you look at the trends in interest rates, so even globally, interest rates are rising. In fact, Nigeria's Eurobond has been classified as a distressed investment. Yeah. Distressed because the yield, that is the interest rate on Nigeria's Eurobond, is 10% more than the interest on the US Treasury. So the yield on Nigeria Eurobond now is more than 13%, whereas the US Treasury bond yield is under 3%. So what that means is the world is seeing us as very risky as a country, and they don't want to invest. This is why the Debt Management Office could not issue the last Eurobond because the interest rate was just too high. Now, when you add on top of that, the Naira is depreciating against all foreign currencies, particularly the USD. What that means is even the debt service we were paying $1 before is now more expensive in Naira terms. Locally, the CBN, or I should say Monetary Policy Committee, have increased the MPR twice. First by 150 basis points and more recently 100 basis points. What that points to is also that interest rates will be rising. So all the indicators are pointing to the fact that our interest rates will not come down in the near term. They'll be going up. So the real solution we must find is one, how do you achieve spending efficiency? How can we be more prudent to cut out waste? How can we push to the private sector what the private sector is better able to do than government because they are more efficient? And how can you generate revenue without coming in the way of business growth and economic development?
Taiwo, a whole lot of things going in my head. And in fact, when I asked you the question if Nigeria is broke, and you said, in fact, Nigeria is broke, and I just started laughing, it was really not a laughing matter. I was really laughing but crying inside. That we've been saying this for years, I did moderate a session, the IMF Regional Economic Outlook. And in fact, you were also a panelist there. That was like 2 months ago also, or a month and a half ago, Taiwo, if you can remember, that I posed that
Yes,
question. Yes, I posed that question directly to the DG of the budget office, and it was like when I asked him, 100% of of our revenue is going to debt service. And I said, no, Nancy, it's not 100%, it's 76%. But whatever it is, take a look at where we are right now. So I'm really bleeding, and my heart is just filled with emotions in a very bad way this morning that we've come to this situation. But the question actually now is that how did we arrive here? Because if I take a look at, I'm trying to pull up the DMO's website right now, and also take a look at how we've been making our money. Let's analyze how we've been making our money. Of course, we make our money through all revenues, which have also been dwindling. I said it earlier, we've not been making money from the close to 2 years rise of Brent crude. We've not made money as much as we should. So we'll make money from all revenues, VAT, company income tax, FGN, independent revenue, as well as customs. Making money, have we made so much, or what other options do we have to make money? Bearing in mind that the Minister of Finance always says, we have a revenue problem, we have a revenue problem, we have a revenue problem. But some people, which you alluded to earlier on, is that we really do have a spending problem, not a revenue problem. Because if you take a look at it, all the governors in Nigeria, perhaps when they leave now in 2023, they will have pensions. Go take a look at their pensions, millions of naira. So much. National Assembly is on its own, a whole lot. So some people will be like, we have a spending problem. Zainab Ahmed, Finance Minister, says we have a revenue problem.
Yes, you're right, and this is the bit that is most concerning for the average Nigerian and people like me and you, is the fact that not only that we are broke, but our behavior does not suggest that we're broke. So it's like someone who is unemployed and they are in debt, and then they're going on vacation to the Bahamas, right? You're not taking steps that can indeed convince everyone that you're indeed, you're feeling concerned about your situation. So our sources of revenue are mostly from taxes, VAT, CIT, like you've mentioned. And to the best of the abilities of the tax authorities, they are trying their best, because really, taxes are how you generate a fraction of the prosperity of people and enterprises. If the economy is struggling, you don't expect any magic or miracle from that regard. Apart from people who are evading taxes, where government needs to use data and intelligence to bring them into the tax net. Like you see recently with the political activities, people paying 100 million to buy forms, and many of them have never paid income taxes before. And annoyingly, the tax authority said, well, if you can just pay us the nominal amount, we give you a tax clearance certificate. Very, very heartbreaking for someone like me. So, but essentially, there's not so much we can do with taxes in the immediate term. Now, the other aspect is resource revenue. And what we have seen over the past few months or 1 year or thereabout is that the NFDC has not been remitting money so far. Why? Because we have decided that even though we are poor, we are not only going to spend the money we have subsidizing petrol, but we would also borrow to be able to do that. Because if you look at the size of the petrol subsidy, is in fact more than all the non-oil taxes collected in Nigeria by FRS, by all the 36 states, plus FCT, plus all 774 local government. This is something that should happen only in Africa Magic, right? It doesn't look real. The amount we're spending on subsidy alone is more than non-oil taxes combined nationwide. Now, what that means is, because money is no longer flowing to the federation account, government is having to borrow more than they planned for. And because they are borrowing more, you expect that the interest cost of servicing the debt can only go in one direction, and that is up. Now, we're only focusing on even this problem for the federal government. We're not even spending enough time on the subnational. Many of the states are continuing to borrow as well. Some of them are technically borrowing from the citizens that are poor already by not paying their salaries and not paying their pension, which is fueling the crisis and poverty that we have in the country. The other aspect, generation is you have all manners of government agencies collecting levies and fees and charges, and many of them, one, they are not prudent in how they spend, there's no accountability, and they actually refuse to remit the surpluses to government. Many of them even collect withholding tax from their contractors and suppliers as well as VAT, and they don't remit. These are government agencies, and you continue to ask yourself and wonder if government cannot even be in charge of their own affairs to make sure that every revenue collected is accounted for and spent in a judicious manner, then what else can you bank on to work effectively? There is oil we have not even talked about. We can't even meet our low OPEC quota of about 174 million, 1.74 million barrels per day. We are underproducing by almost 600,000 barrels per day when the price of oil in the international market is pretty high, and we should technically be printing dollars as we speak. What that means is that also in fact impacts on the FX regime, that you have this wide margin between the official rate and parallel rate, and people who want to do legitimate businesses, including manufacturers, importing inputs and equipment, can't find dollars to do their business. And that is impacting on capacity and therefore reducing the supply of goods as well as services, which is fueling inflation. So you can find the root of almost all the problems we have as a country into this particular conversation around revenue and spending. And this is not a problem that God is going to solve for us because it's man-made, it's self-inflicted. And we have to take the right steps urgently to fix this problem because before it becomes a bigger crisis like what we saw recently in Sri Lanka.
In Sri Lanka, yeah. And that brings me to my next question, which is also very scary for me, the sense of urgency, which I don't think I have seen. I don't know if you've seen that. A sense of urgency from the government on all levels to address this situation. From all indications, there's a revenue problem, perhaps there's a spending problem, and there's also a costs problem. Then there's the corruption side of it, that even the monies we are going, a majority of it or some part of it is also going into private pockets and being unaccounted for. Now the question is, we are here now. Where do we go from here? How do we address this fiscal crisis? How do we address this fiscal challenge? Because we can't continue like this. If we continue like this for the next 1 year,
yeah, we certainly can't continue like this. Even if we decide to continue like this, it's to get to a point, what I call the breaking point, that everything will break apart. And we hope that will not happen. But again, we need more than prayers. So the first thing we need to do is to, for people in position of powers, the policymakers, this will be the executive at the federal level, the National Assembly, the governors at the state level, need to recognize that there's a problem and use data to identify the size of that problem. For example, we're saying that the economy is struggling, businesses are struggling to stay afloat. Just in the past 1 or 2 months alone, the National Assembly has introduced 2 new taxes. In fact, just 2 days ago, I heard there's now a new tax for Social Security. Before then, there was one for NYSC scheme. Before that, there was police, there was engineering and science, technology, NASENI. You keep asking yourself, is there something wrong with us? We say businesses are struggling to just even stay afloat to keep the people they have employed and produce, and you are then introducing new taxes without asking questions about the taxes we have introduced before. What have we done with them? Look at the education sector. We introduced tertiary education tax in 1993. Fast forward 30 years later, they are on strike for 5 months, and they have been for a number of months in the past few years. I looked at the amount we collected in education tax over the past 10 years, and it's over 2 trillion naira. How come nobody is explaining how we spent 2 trillion naira without any noticeable impact in the education sector? So the first thing is we have to recognize there's a problem and use data and evidence to quantify the size of that problem and the sources of that problem. Number 2, we must have very clear action plan as to how to address the problem that should be communicated to the Nigerian people and for which the Nigerian people, including the media and individuals, and the civil society and the organized private sector, must hold government to account. For example, tax harmonization, reduce the number of taxes. More than 98% of the revenue we generate today from taxes come from less than 10 taxes. Yet Nigerians are having to deal with more than 60 different taxes, which government cannot even explain. They can't account for it. Reduce the number of revenue agencies, only one agency per level of government. The National Assembly, as we speak now, is also considering another bill. They said they want to set up a National Tax Crimes Commission. And I said, for what? You set up another agency again, you
Yeah.
start allocating budget and money you don't have. When you already have the FRS, there's EFCC, there's ICPC. So we need to do those harmonization, and then we must use data and intelligence to ensure that if you can pay 100 million naira to buy a farm, not only must you have paid taxes in the past, the amount of taxes you pay must bear some correlation with your lifestyle and your wealth. And then we have to ensure that government also cuts inefficiency in spending. We should not be spending 6 trillion on petrol subsidy, diesel, kerosene, even the things that the poorest people use. When you enter Molo in Lagos, you are not enjoying subsidy because it's running on diesel. They are not getting subsidy. Why then are we spending more than our entire revenue on fuel subsidy alone? This is an issue we have to address. And some of my proposal to government is, even if you can't take it out overnight, because the economy is struggling and people are poor, you can restructure the subsidy regime such that it becomes a subsidy at the pump for only the people that are poor. And that will be essentially public transportation that is powered by petrol. And you can identify those people and monitor their consumption at the pump so that the rest of us that can afford, expensive cars should also be able to afford the fueling of those vehicles. And I have to say to you that I feel that even the subsidy regime, as well as the price of diesel, as well as even aviation fuel, has significant inefficiency. The international price, wholesale price of 1 liter of diesel today is about $1. Even if you convert it at the black market rate, why are we selling it in Nigeria for more than 800 naira? That same inefficiency that we have in diesel is also in petrol that is subsidized, which is why the amount of subsidy, in my view, is blowing out of proportion. Go to Benin Republic there, 1 liter of diesel is just about $1. You cannot say they are smuggling diesel from Nigeria to Benin Republic, right? Because it's more expensive here. So there has to be something we can do to cut out inefficiency, wastage, get our priority right in terms of spending, so that the little money we have, we can manage it to ensure that this country remains a country that is together, not a failing state, pending when our economic situations we have, we'll see the brighter days.
Mr. Oyedele, the task before the new administrators of this country come 2023 is huge. What kind of CEO or what are the issues now before the next president? Because you said it earlier, I look at Nigeria as a private entity. If Nigeria is a private or is a private company, I guess the CEO must have been ousted, or the board would just sack the CEO, or something would have happened, because we can't continue to live life recklessly, almost on all fronts, as it were. I know that there are a few pockets of good things that are happening, but a lot more bad things have overshadowed those good things. So the challenge before the next president, or even before the next governors, what are those? Do you think that they really understand this? And how are they going to solve it? What kind of questions and answers should Nigerians be demanding on who the next CEO or the next CEOs should be?
Yeah, this is a fundamental question, Nancy. Unfortunately, I do not see anything in the public space that gives me the comfort that we do anything differently from what we have done in the past, whether it's the past elections or thereabouts. Essentially, what is most important for the next CEO of corporate Nigeria, both at the center and at subnational, is competence. In fact, I place competence over everything else, even over and above integrity, because if you are honest and you are clueless, there will be crisis. I'm not suggesting that we should allow, corrupt people to lead us. I'm not suggesting that. But in terms of priority, competence first. When you have the right competence everywhere, not only as the president and ministers, but head of agencies, head of the security forces, you have them in the civil service making decisions for Nigeria, right? The problem in Sri Lanka today essentially was driven by bad policies. Government decided to cut taxes at the wrong time. Government decided that, fertilizer, we don't want chemical fertilizer anymore. We're trying to protect the environment, and they banned chemical fertilizer when they don't have enough biofertilizer, so they can't even produce food. At the same time, that an economy that relies so much on tourism, COVID had stopped that. So FX was not coming in. So it was very predictable that the country was going to go into crisis. So it was not surprising. So when you begin to see those signs and you cannot read them correctly to take the right steps, then the outcome is predictable. I do not, unfortunately, I do not see any of the leading presidential candidates having these genuine conversations. Also, unfortunately, because the Nigerian people are not asking those questions, we are preoccupied by the region, we are preoccupied by religion, we are preoccupied by sentiments, rather than focusing on the issues. Because at the end of the day, if we don't address these issues, we all will bear the consequences. Even after you japa, this thing about relocating out of the country, the way you be treated wherever you go is still a function of how your country is respected or not respected.
Yeah.
So whatever we do in Nigeria, so long as you have been born in Nigeria, your destiny is tied to this country, whether you relocate or not. So we must come together and recognize that we have to fix this problem together. Otherwise, we all have to face the consequences.
I know that our time is fast spent. If you can answer this in 30 seconds because we've got to go. This is a very essential question. Who will pay back? What we are discussing today now, who is going to bear the burden of paying back? Because earlier on, from your own calculation, 50 trillion naira, if we add the CBN's ways and means, if you do it, I quickly did a calculation, every Nigerian is owing 250,000 naira today as it stands with 50 trillion naira debt. Who will pay this back? Is it Buhari and people in this administration, or is it you and me, and how?
No, it will be you and I that will pay back, and the way we pay back is by way of higher taxes. So we'll be the ones to pay back. But I have to tell you that I'm not very worried about the average Nigerian paying back 250,000 naira or 300,000 naira. I'm worried about whether they will have the ability to pay. So if you focus on making sure that there's prosperity, if the average Nigerian today is worth 10 million naira, they will pay. In fact, they will donate extra money to government after paying back the 250,000 naira per person, which is why Americans have to pay back average of $90,000, and they're not worried because they can see prosperity and they can see hope in the horizon. So these are the issues for Nigeria. We must address the current issues, but more importantly, we must be laser focused on our tomorrow. How do we ensure that this trend does not continue? How do we ensure that Nigerians succeed and businesses can prosper and then pay a fraction of their prosperity to government as revenue, which government must then use for the benefit of the people? This is the essence of the social contract.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oyedele. And let's end it there. Of course, it's a stormy cloud. There's a stormy cloud in the horizon, storms. So let's see what happens. But the rain shouldn't just be heavy on us, and it's on the doorsteps of the administrators and those that are concerned with managing the economy to manage it well. Thank you, Mr. Oyedele. I hope we'll get to do this again soon, because there are so many issues we'll talk about, and I'll continue to look at it again. Perhaps we'll need to do a series on this because there are so many issues. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I've been speaking with Taiwo Oyedele, who is the Africa tax leader, as well as the fiscal policy partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers. We've been looking at Nigeria's debt servicing costs versus the revenue. All in all of what we're saying in Yoruba parlance is Nigeria Jegbesi. That means Nigeria is owing, but most importantly, we are all owing. So all of us are owing. From the calculations, 250,000 naira. I will see you all again tomorrow, God willing. Be the best you can be and be the change that you want to see. I am Nancy Naji. Bye now.